Well, welcome back to my latest video in my now long-running series of episodes about my recovery from a stroke and what I've learned along the way and what I hope to continue learning. Um, and as I call this, from recovery to discovery, because I learned early on that getting a physical recovery back to who I was before the stroke, being able to use both hands fully and walk normally and all that is not going to happen for me. Um, Does that mean, though, that I'm not a human being anymore, that I'm not Scott anymore? No, that's not at all what it means. And in fact, I've talked in the past about different aspects of recovery beyond just the mere physical ability. One of the metrics I used was how well can I read and comprehend, always a big part of my life, and I lost that for a while. And I've also talked about how dimensions of recovery. Maybe you haven't seen my earlier episodes where I talk about this, but I say that there are three dimensions of recovery that I call survive, sustain, and succeed. That survival means just the basic day to day, getting in and out of bed, getting cleaned up, fixing myself something to eat, being able to get dressed, and go to the bathroom without help, all that kind of stuff. Just basic survival skills. And then sustaining skills, can I clean house a little bit? Can I drive a car? Can I go shopping? Can I do these other things, to any level? And sustain my life, can I write out checks to pay bills? And then, of course, the third dimension is when I talk about succeed, and that's something I define. So, and success is something each of us can define in our own way. For me, being successful is, for example, doing these videos, or giving a talk, or being able to encourage a friend, or help someone out in some other activity. Recently, one of my sisters-in-law needed help writing an ad for a car she was selling, and I came up with something clever for her. I'm also participating in some other activities, and those are all successes because, I'm a contributing member of society again. But, one of my concerns has always been this idea that in terms of formal recovery, it's defined pretty much in a mechanical way. And even beyond my survive, sustain, succeed, there are other parts of recovery too that are kind of subtle, not quantitative but more qualitative. And I belong to a stroke group that meets once a month, and we were talking the other day about how after the stroke, a lot of people struggle with being able to control their emotions. One woman was saying that she's just incredibly irritable. And I went through that phase where I was explosive, and also just like all my emotions were ratcheted up to 12. That I would laugh hysterically or cry uncontrollably or be in an unbelievable grouch or get really depressed or whatever. And a lot of that is stabilized, I'm trying to have more normal reactions, not be quite so hysterical. But it's a real challenge, because it's like, well, really, how do you define a human being? What does it mean to be human? What does it mean to be an adult? And these things are, they're not that easy. So, if you've been through something, some phase in your life that has changed, how do you know that it's different? It's sort of like when I was growing up. How did I know when I became an adolescent? How did I know when I reached adulthood? It's kind of what Joseph Campbell talks about as being transparent to transcendence. Like I know when I became an adult, I didn't really realize I had become an adult until I looked back and said, okay, well, I don't, I guess I'm an adult now, and at the right after my stroke, I did not think of myself as being permanently disabled. I knew I was disabled, but at some point I passed a threshold where I realized it's like, okay, this is, the way it's going to be. What are we going to do now? So how about you? What experiences have you had that have changed your life? And it doesn't have to be an injury. It can be just some phase of life, like if you got married, when did you know that you were really married, So, because you can't anticipate what it's like until it happens, believe me. So, how do you cope with that? How do you think of yourself? How do you measure that sort of thing? I would really like to know. I would love to hear from you. I like emails and comments here and upvotes and sharing and subscribing and all that good stuff, which I always appreciate. And I try to respond to every email that I'm sent. So anyway, what do you think? What are some measures of humanity that you think about? I mean, how do you think of yourself in terms of being being a fully adult participating human being in society. What do you think that means? So once again, thanks again for watching, and I look forward to your responses, and then we'll see you in a future episode.